Previously in Formula 1.
Lights out, away we go, and they try not to get too much wheel spin, and it's a good start from Raikkonen, if anything. Raikkonen, and the X-Vettel as well!
Sorry guys, easily wrong. Sorry, I'm really sorry.
Boom, shakalaka.
Get in there, Lewis. What an awesome drive, mate.
Guys, what can I say? What a turnaround today.
I have no power.
We go Verstappen on the inside of Hamilton, and with DRS, it's the lead of the race from Max Verstappen. Lewis Hamilton's lead has gone.
That's how we do it. Well done, mate. Right, let's clear the DRS. Think about your tyres now.
Max Verstappen wins the Grand Prix and takes the Malaysia Grand Prix for Red Bull.
Well, yes! Woo! Happy birthday, mate. Is that possible? Stroll is not looking where he's going. He completely shunted into my car. I mean, seriously.
5 races to go. You're listening to the Pole Position Podcast from Let's Talk Sport.
Lights out, away we go!
Next up on the F1 calendar is the Japanese Grand Prix this weekend, and Daniel Ricciardo of Red Bull gives us a tip for what weather we should expect on the weekend.
The sun doesn't always rise.
Stay tuned for the Pole Position Podcast as we have big news to announce.
That's the greatest moment of my life. Thank you guys so much.
So to start off our preview to the Japanese Grand Prix, we'll start off with Off the Track, which will be talking about the gossip outside of Formula 1. So the real big news of the week is Robert Kubica, yes, that man who had that fatal crash in 2011 just before the season was about to begin, has actually been given a 2-day testing for Williams, along with the reserve driver for Williams, which is Paul di Resta. Now, of course, Kubica has had a bit of testing with Renault throughout the summer. He's done very well from what the bosses have said, even though Kubica started off by hitting something on the way out the garage because he forgot how wide the new F1 cars were, which was pretty hilarious. But you got to give that Polishman a lot of credit to come back after 6 years of being out of F1. He may just be one step closer to making that significant comeback for the 2018 season. We did, of course, ask you on the Let's Talk Sport Twitter account, which you can follow us at Let's Talk Sport 12. We actually put out a poll earlier this week, and the question was, who should Williams hire for the 2018 F1 season? Well, it was pretty much like a Vettel dominance of 2013. Robert Kubica with 92%, 5% Paul di Resta, which just makes it really depressing because Felipe Massa is 3%, who is once nearly a world champion. He was once nearly a world champion and has missed out at second place to Paul di Resta by 2%. I have a feeling that there might be someone in this team that jokingly voted for Paul di Resta. He's looking the other way, and that is Jack Price. What on earth were you doing?
Well, I just felt bad because he hadn't got any percent when I looked at the poll, and I was like, well, that's a bit harsh, so I'll vote for him.
I tell you know what, Jack? There's this thing called you're fired down again, you know. Now I need you more than ever. But let's talk to somebody else who's with us. He's back from the dead. It's Dan Middleton.
I'm like the reincarnation of my former self. I'm still a little bit croaky, but I'm getting there. So good to be back on.
So Dan, let's get your first thoughts because it's been 2 weeks now. But what was your thoughts of the testing offered to Robert Kubica? Is this a step closer, or is this just something in which they'll just say, look, we'll have you trying out our F1 car, but nothing more than that?
I'd like to think the first one. I'd like to think that it's a step closer for a return. I think obviously suffering those life-changing injuries, I think, affects anybody. Doesn't matter how mentally strong you are. But to then come back from that, and as we discussed a few weeks back actually on that very first podcast about Kubica and whether Williams would offer him that testing, fair play to them for actually doing it, and it's good to see him really giving it a good go, and I hope potentially for him to get back in an F1 car permanently to get back to where he was previously. So it's good to see him doing that 2 days test. I think he needs it. I think he needs to get back behind a wheel, and it's really good to see, and good for the sport as well, because he's obviously got a lot of fans worldwide and people that like him, and I think we all respect him here. So I think it's good to get him back in the car.
Jack, of course, Robert Kubica, we watched him many years ago being one of those best, being one of those good drivers out there that just wasn't always in the big team, but he always made a good car look very good. And let's not forget, he won for Sauber back in 2008. So, but do you ever feel that with how many years he's been out of Formula One, it may just not help him get that seat back?
Yeah, I sort of feel like this is a publicity stunt by Williams. I think obviously Renault did it earlier in the year, but I sort of think Williams are doing it as well, with the fact that the testing that's going on. Felipe Massa said it just it was a couple of days ago when they arrived in Japan, that they're actually testing a car that's 4 years old, and it's literally got nothing to do with what's going to be happening this year and in the 2018. The cars are going to be, they're not as wide as they are now. They've obviously got different engines. 4 years ago is a long time in F1. So I just sort of feel like him and Di Resta in a car that's 4 years old, is it really going to make a difference? Is it really going to help Williams think he's the best man? I personally, I don't think so. So it's going to be interesting, and I think a lot of people are looking forward to it, for obviously see Kubica getting back in an F1 car again. But I don't really think it'll make an impact on who Williams pick.
Well, I mean, it's a tricky one, isn't it, for Williams? You've got a potential, a guy who's proved himself very well with the smaller teams in Formula One. You have Paul Di Resta, who's got the experience, but with Force India as well. But you just feel it's not exactly the fans' favourite, but in a professional term, Di Resta may actually be a better option.
Jamie, put it this way: you can tell from the fact that me and Jack are laughing as soon as you mention the name. I think says it all.
The thing is, it's a bit disappointing for Williams is that they have to pick somebody over 25 because of their Martini deal. So they can't pick the likes of Pascal Wehrlein's not sure about his seat at Sauber. You've got a few other choices in F1, but they can't pick a younger guy because, one, they've already got Lance Stroll, and two, they need to pick somebody that's older for the brand deal. So, when they've got to pick between Massa and Kubica and all that, it's probably not the best.
Yeah, because I remember when I heard the rumours of Pascal Wehrlein being at the back of the garage drinking too much martini, saying, "Pascal, can you race today? I love you." Yeah, he's up too much. No drink driving for him. But of course, Felipe Massa, he has actually said recently. Well, actually, in the pre-race press conference, they always pick 6 drivers, 3 in each session. And, of course, Felipe Massa and his teammate Lance Stroll were in that press conference, and this was both of their thoughts on their future in F1.
To be honest, in my head, I'm pretty relaxed. So I'm enjoying and trying to do the best I can in the last races this year. I'm quite keen to do maybe another season. I think I can do in a great way. I can give a lot to the team. I'm talking with the team, definitely, for next year. And we are in discussion. So if people is happy that I stay, and I will do everything I can to stay on the top level.
He just brings a lot of experience to the team, and I've been able to use him as a benchmark throughout my rookie season. So he's really helped develop the car in many ways with these new regulations, and as well, I think I've been able to pick up a few details along the way.
So Massa wants to continue despite the fact that he actually initially retired last year, but had to come back because of Valtteri Bottas moving to Mercedes. Jack, do you think Massa should stay for one more year, or do you think he should move aside for maybe a younger driver to get the experience?
Well, we've discussed that they're going to struggle to get a younger driver, but with Felipe Massa, he still says that he's ready. He still wants to do another season, and he's a professional and experienced racing driver. I think he's helped Lance Stroll in his rookie season this year. Obviously, if you're Lance Stroll, you want somebody as experienced as Felipe Massa next to you in the garage. So if he says he can do another year, I don't see why Williams wouldn't do it. Maybe it's because he hasn't got the financial backing of other drivers, maybe. And obviously Williams not being a works team, they want as much money into the team as possible. But I think if Felipe Massa can still do it, he's still been getting points this season. It's not like he's just dropped off the boil. He still can produce points for the team, and he can still get, as much as possible. They're not going to get race wins, but I think that if he can still do it, why wouldn't you pick him?
Dan, you've been a good follower of Felipe Massa over the years. I feel like as a fan of F1, I just wish back in 2008 it was him that won the World Championship and not Hamilton, just because he never got close to it again. Do you think the fans want Massa even more as well?
Of course the fans want Massa, because he is a fan's favourite, isn't he? He's like Alonso. He's in a team that's, well, Alonso's below average, but I think Massa's like Jack said, I've got to agree with him. I think Massa's a quality driver. I think he's been there, done it, got the T-shirt several times. Now he knows what he's doing. And I think, like you said, he's helped Lance Stroll a lot. So I think he needs to be there for Williams to have any kind of relative success for themselves. Obviously, they're not going to get the World Championship or anything like that. But in terms of beating their own targets, I think Massa needs to be there to have any chance. So I'd like to see him have another year. I think hopefully next year brings a little bit more look for Williams, but we'll see, because they could go a completely different way and go, actually, we don't need you, we've got this plan in place, and bring somebody else in. But of course, I think we'd all like to see Massa have another year.
So Williams yet to still decide on their future for their two drivers for 2018. We must now build up to the Japanese Grand Prix. As you can hear the Japanese national anthem in the background, we move to the Suzuka International Racing Course. And of course, this is just a week after Malaysia, so it's been a very busy week for all the engineers, the mechanics, the marshals, the stewards, and of course the drivers of Formula One. So the length of each lap is 3.6 miles, and amazing how you can do that in under 2 minutes. The distance will be 53 laps, which is overall just over 191 miles. There are 18 turns on the Suzuka circuit, and the lap record is 1:31.5 seconds from Kimi Raikkonen in a McLaren in 2005. Wow, yes, a McLaren used to be fast. And of course, from last year, Nico Rosberg won the race when his rival Lewis Hamilton finished third to dent the Britain's chances of winning a world championship. Max Verstappen came second, and Nico Rosberg got pole position that weekend as well. And funny enough, if people really want to know, especially the UK viewers, Sky Sports F1 is having Nico Rosberg as one of their pundits, you could say, for this weekend. So it'll be very interesting when they get him to interview Lewis Hamilton, maybe, where Hamilton would think, wimp, you left.
It doesn't exactly fill you with joy, though, does it? Oh, we've put Nico Rosberg. It seems great, but let's be honest, it's a bit of an average person to have on board. As much as he's a world champion and a decent driver at that, in front of a camera, I don't think he's got that personality that I think you'd look for in a presenter or a pundit or whatever. I don't think he's... No, it could prove me wrong, but I don't think he's got that natural...
Well, to be fair, if I'm being honest, he's kind of with the best team to do it, because Johnny Herbert and Martin Brundle don't exactly fill me with joy.
Johnny Herbert I accept, but not Brundle. And Paul di Resta, let's not forget that. And Anthony Davidson, who wastes.
He's like the Oxlade-Chamberlain, isn't he, Paul di Resta? He's buying that shirt. Can
you imagine if Damon Hill just came in one week and just goes, I've watched Paul di Resta throughout his career. I still don't know what he's doing. Anyway, before we start ranting about the Sky Sports F1 team, we will talk about the practice. Of course, me and Jack, as we said last week, we don't really look at practice 1, but we might actually have to, because practice 2 only had 5 drivers actually doing a lap, and that was Lewis Hamilton coming out on top, Esteban Ocon and Sergio Perez for Force India completing a potential podium place. It's not really happening, is it? Felipe Massa and Lance Stroll as well for Williams, 4th and 5th for them. And then the rest of the list, there was at the end there was 15 drivers that didn't even finish a lap. But it was certainly a wet one. If you go on Twitter or anything, if you look at the picture, Stoffel Van Dorn and Pascal Wehrlein were absolutely hilarious. When it's raining on the pit lane, it's not a wet track without a good old little paper boat going across the pit lane, especially when a car might be going past. That wouldn't be clever. But hey, if you've watched Stephen King's It, you don't want to be that kid, do you? When it goes into the drain and then there's a Pennywise the Clown in there wanting to offer you a balloon. Luckily, that didn't happen to those drivers, so we are great that they're still back with us in one piece. But we've always said this, Jack, practice doesn't always mean a lot, but for Hamilton, I guess he'll be quite happy that himself, and instead of his championship rival Vettel, was able to go out on the track on a wet track as well in the final practice.
Yeah, as much as practice doesn't really matter in the great scheme of things, if you're a racing driver, you want to win every single time you go out on the track, even if that just means a session. So I think drivers always want to be the best in practice 1, 2 and 3, pole at qualifying and win the race and fastest lap. That's what their great weekend is. Although nothing really happened in practice 2 because it was terrible with rain. I feel sorry for all the, like you said earlier, all the fans that standing out there. A lot of them with their I love the little McLaren hats with the DRS flap that can open on the hat. That's just great.
I tell you what, Jack, I bet those rear wings are actually better than the ones that are back in the garage, and I bet the DRS is better on them as well, even though they're smaller.
Yeah, Zach Brown will be trying to find them, going, "How did you do that part? I want to know. I want to attach it to next year."
That's like Zack Snyder when he's directing a film. How did you actually make a film? Anyway, I thought I'd relate because it's Zach. Anyway, Dan, obviously the practices we mentioned not that important, but I mean, I think it could be a wreck race this weekend. But I feel like, is this going to be Hamilton's advantage or Vettel's advantage? I feel like Vettel has the advantage overall because he's won on this circuit so many times.
If we're going on what Lewis Hamilton said, I think it was either last week or the week before, about if it's a wet circuit, it's to my advantage. I'm really good on the wet tracks. If you're to go with that, then you go Hamilton, don't you? But I think that makes it really interesting, and I think it'll affect strategies as well, especially with the wet race. Obviously, they're going to have to go right. We'll have to look at potentially some more stops. Is that going to affect placements and podium positions, etc., etc.? I think it'd be very interesting. I'd like to see it as a wet race. I think it would be a lot more difficult for Hamilton to finish pole. I do. I think Vettel has a chance. I think if it's just a standard circuit, if it's just a dry day like it is today in the UK, then I think it's Hamilton's to lose, to be honest, or Mercedes in general to lose. I think Bottas could have a good weekend as well, and I'd like to see that.
I like that, Dan. You mentioned Bottas, and I'd like to talk about him now because he actually said in the pre-race press conference that he says this may be the most difficult moment of his career so far. Let's hear what he had to say.
Only thing I want to do is to perform and to try and meet my goals. I definitely haven't been achieving those lately, so that's why the feeling wasn't so positive after the race. So for sure it's tricky because now, having such a good car and with potential for such a good results, for sure, just want to perform. So that's why.
Jack, Bottas there going on about it being a difficult moment for him in his career, which I thought was quite weird to hear him say, because when the chap has been offered another year contract at Mercedes by, let's be honest, he's been a good teammate to Hamilton. He's done what he's asked. He's helped him out by getting the most points as possible for each race. Do you think Bottas maybe being a bit too harsh on himself?
I think the only way he's disappointed with this season is the fact that with the last couple of years at Williams, there's not really a lot of pressure to be scoring maximum points every week. If you get a 5th or a 6th or even a 7th for Williams, it's seen as a good weekend. Whereas at Mercedes, it's sort of a 1-2 needs to happen every race. So I can sort of see why he feels like it's possibly the most disappointing part of his career is the fact that he needs to be at the top every single race. He can't have a poor race at Mercedes. They don't expect that. That's not something that they want. Their promoters, the sponsors, they don't want that. They want a 1-2 or a podium every week. So when he finishes possibly 4th or lower end of the table, it's seen as a disappointment for the team. So I can sort of see why he's like that. But he's a great driver at a great team. So he just needs to put the performances in, and I feel he can still do that. Dan,
I remember a few years ago Hamilton used to be quite harsh on himself when he didn't drive very well, even though some people said you did a good finish there in that McLaren or whatever car he was in at the time. But do you think this is where we start to see the Bottas in him, where he is in that championship mode? He might actually be like this next year, where he will feel that if this is his only year in Mercedes with the car that's capable of winning him a world championship, then he will have to do what Nico Rosberg did and challenge against one of the best drivers on the circuit.
I think next year is going to be the real test. I think this year for Bottas at Mercedes was a bedding in period. Getting to know a quicker car, getting to know obviously Lewis Hamilton as a teammate. I know obviously he knows about Lewis Hamilton, of course, but as a teammate working together, working things out is totally new to him in that sense. So I think next year is going to be the real test for Bottas. If he obviously stays at Mercedes, that car stays as quick, if not gets quicker, he's going to be up there to challenge for that world championship, and you will see. I wouldn't say the real Bottas, because you don't change that often, but I think you'll see him in more of a competitive mode because it's an even playing field from the start. Obviously this year Hamilton, Vettel, they've pulled away, and realistically it's a 2-horse race, isn't it, to the finish. So Bottas is going to have to settle for third, maybe fourth, but he's still got to put those performances in, and I think this weekend is a chance for him to almost silence the doubters, I guess, because I think a lot of people have been talking about him. Obviously he's under Lewis Hamilton's limelight this season, and I think this weekend will give him a chance to really go for it, and if he wins, he wins, but I think he's got to get, like Jack said, he's got to get a minimum podium to, realistically, to keep Mercedes happy.
I remember watching I think it was the media visiting his home in Finland, and I think I straight away thought, he wants to be a successful driver. He wants to do the best he can while he's in F1, just so it's something he can look back on and be proud of. But as well as that, Jack, Finland is known for having 2 world champions. That's Mika Häkkinen and Kimi Räikkönen. Do you feel that kind of pressurises him as well, thinking he needs to deliver the same as they did?
Yeah, I mean, it's not like you're coming into the sport as one of the first drivers from your country to be in F1. It is very difficult, but I always feel like if I could have learned to drive anywhere in the world, it would have been somewhere like Finland, because they really are extensive when trying to pass your driving test, even from a young age. They really are. So important to be able to drive well in that country. So it is a bit of a pressure when you start in F1 and you've got them 2 fantastic world champions from your country, but I feel like when you're a racing driver in that moment, that doesn't really matter, and you're just out on the track to do the best that you can, and he has got the capabilities to be a world champion.
Let's talk about Stoffel Van Dorn then. Let's move on to him. Now, he's a young, well, I say young driver. He's 25, 26 now from the top of my head. He's in his first season with McLaren Honda. I'm starting to really like this guy a lot, because he seems quite a positive man. He seems quite laid back. He knows the car isn't the best. Just talk to Alonso. I'm sure we could get a good few hours of him interviewed if we could. McLaren Honda, give us an hour, please. You'll see my letter. But Van Dorn, he's definitely enjoying the experience. But let's not forget what he did in Singapore and Malaysia, the last 2 races before Japan, where he has consistently finished 7th and has also said this is definitely the best time of his F1 career so far. Let's hear what he had to say on his current form from the driver's press conference.
Yeah, lately everything has been going very well for me. I think it shows that all the work I've been doing with the team, with the engineers back at the factory as well, is paying off, and yeah, obviously feeling more and more comfortable with the car. I don't want to get used to being happy with 7, but I think considering the package we have, it was definitely the best result possible. 5 races left this year, which is hopefully 5 opportunities for us to make something good of it. So shows we have to keep pushing, keep working as hard as we can, and who knows what is possible for the final couple of races.
Jack, I know you're a big McLaren Honda fan. Van Dorn is the only driver out the 2 of him and Alonso to be announced for next year. I believe the Alonso contract talks are still going, probably because he wants 50 million this time and not 40 million this year. He's a good driver. But for Van Dorn, he's definitely one of those. He's not just in it for the money. He's clearly not in it because of his name or anything like that. He really is a driver that will do his best for a car that is limited.
Yeah, I mean, they were never going to push for anything really this year, and I think a lot of people are actually surprised that he's getting 7 places. You know, two races in a row now. He's finished 7th. So for a McLaren Honda, that's that's a really good job for the season, considering how poor that they've been, especially at the start of the year. But you know, he is a talented driver. I mean, a lot of people at the start of the year weren't so sure about him, but I think that was mainly down to the car not performing as well as he'd like. Obviously, Fernando Alonso knows just as well as him how bad the car's been this year. It will be different next year, I feel, with Renault. I think the thing is that McLaren have got a great chassis, and we know that they have. Red Bull, I think, is probably the best chassis in F1, but McLaren has got to be somewhere around there. It's just that the actual engine and the stuff that's going on in the back of the car hasn't been a success. So with Renault, they've got a decent engine, so I expect them to be fighting around the top next year, and I think with Van Dorn, McLaren have got a good chance. If Alonso signs, he probably will because it's Renault now. Then that's 2 great drivers in hopefully a great team next year.
Dan, I mean, Van Dorn is one of those who is a champion. He's done it before he came into Formula One. What do you think of him at the moment?
Well, I think you mentioned that he's a positive person. I think he must be the only positive person in that team. I think they've had a pretty abysmal season, bar the past 2 7th, as you mentioned. And I'm hoping Jack's not clutching at straws in any way, because McLaren have been awful this season. Next season, if they're really going to push with Van Dorn and Alonso, they're going to have to get it spot on. Realistically, this season they've been well away from the pace. They've not had a real chance. Alonso, as much as he's a great driver, that car is pretty horrendous. But I like Van Dorn. I think he's got a good future ahead of him. I think the next few years, obviously, if he stays at McLaren, they keep improving. I hope they do, for his sake. I hope he's not a wasted talent, because you see so many good drivers come through that get put into pretty poor teams and they don't tend to shine as much and they go under the radar too often. So I'd like to see Van Dorn up there pushing for, even if it's not podiums, just top 6, top 7. Like he has done for the past 2 races. I think I'd love to see that, and I think he'll progress as a driver, especially under Alonso as well. If he's got him by his side, the amount of tips and things you can get off Alonso, I think would be brilliant for him.
So we've moved on to the final part of our build-up to the Japanese Grand Prix on the Pole Position podcast, and that is, of course, the Pole Position podcast Predictions Championship. Something Jack Price has been looking forward to all week. He's been so excited like a baby when it's Christmas.
I'm pumped.
He's pumped to get his first ever points. Of course, if we look at the championship table between us 4, including Harry's, well, he's probably dead. We'll talk about him in a minute. But at this moment,
it's me in the deathbed.
and it's Mr. F1 himself, Harry Wright, who is top with 18 points, but he's only 2 ahead because he scored no points last weekend. Neither did Dan. So Dan's second still with 16. I'm second as well with 16. I was the only one who got points, 8 overall. Yeah, I'm going up places. And Jack Price, well, he is the Sauber of this circuit so far, isn't he? He's still got no points after 2 races. But let's go through the predictions. Dan, let's start off with you. Who have you predicted, or do you want me to remind you?
You can remind me, my friend. Let the listeners know. I'll let you do the honours.
I always say this, if you're not positive about your predictions, you never remember it. So Dan...
I'm very positive. I'm just going to let you do the honours.
Well, you've said that Bottas will win the Japanese Grand Prix, so that, I must admit, was quite surprised about. But hey, the prediction is a prediction. For Max Verstappen for second, and Lewis Hamilton third, but he'll be ahead of Vettel, so that'll increase his gap depending on where Vettel finishes in the race. Jack Price, do you want me to remind you?
I'm not positive, so can you remind me?
Okay, negativity in Jack Price, I sense. Lewis Hamilton first, so of course he didn't win last year, he came third, but he might do it this weekend according to Jack. Daniel Ricciardo second, and Sebastian Vettel third. And Vettel, well, he'll be relieved to see a podium place this weekend, let's be honest. Harry Wright, well, I always text you guys to find out what your predictions are so I can write it down before the podcast. Harry hasn't sent me any, so we have this default setting where we randomly pick for them, and we think we've been very generous. Pascal Wehrlein of Sauber first, and that would be his first ever race winner. Yeah, first ever podium as well. Marcus Ericsson second, his teammate. What an amazing weekend Sauber could have. And Fernando Alonso third. So Alonso must be having a bad season if he can't beat the Saubers if he's getting a podium place with McLaren Honda.
I also thought that Harry put Jolyon Palmer in fourth as well.
Yeah,
that's what I did.
Yeah. I've heard that rumour as well, Dan. I think the media might be correct for once. So, yes, it looks like Harry has gone for a very unpredictable podium, but you just never know. I'll be honest, deep down, if that somehow did happen, then we're going to look like fools.
Just imagine if that pulls off and he gets 1, 2, 3, bang on.
And instead of using the sound effect, wah, 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 it'll be down to us three instead. Okay, here's mine. If you really want to hear them, do you want to hear them?
I suppose we have to, don't we? Really?
Yeah. You had no option there. It's like the Empire of Star Wars. You have no option. We're going to kill you. Well, that's a bit too dark. So Sebastian Vettel to win the race just because he's won there before and he's done quite well there in the past, 2013 and 2012. And I'm not sure if he's won any other years, but he's won at least twice Japan from the top of my head. And Hamilton second, so he could reduce the gap from 34 points as it is at the moment. And Kimi Räikkönen third. And Kimi Räikkönen, he's had double DNFs in the last two races. So I think him getting a podium will be great for him. And I'm sure the first word that would come out that when they interview him on the podium will be, "Bwah." But anyway, those are our predictions. Good luck to you two and to Harry, especially Harry, for this weekend, for the predictions. We will let you know the results, of course, at the end of the weekend. For our review of the Japanese Grand Prix. So thank you very much to Dan and Jack for their contributions to the podcast. Enjoy the race on Sunday, everyone, and make sure you subscribe to Let's Talk Sport for more of the Pole Position Podcast. And the big news to announce on behalf of the Pole Position Podcast team is that we will have an interview with Karen Chandok, who is, of course, the Channel 4 pit lane reporter and commentator and a former Formula 1 driver, as we'll get to interview him in just a few days' time. So make sure you stay tuned for that, and we will have it here on the Let's Talk Sport YouTube channel. Don't miss that. Thank you very much for listening, and see you later.